All right, so now we're kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of the actual investigation part. So the first thing we want to do is figure out the origin. That is the room or the section of the building where the fire started or originated at. So finding the origin essentially is going from the places of little to no damage and ruling those out as being possible places the fire could have started at. Scientific method, facts first, assumptions later. So we start ruling out the possibilities of this room being where the fire started because there's no fire damage here, and we start going to the areas where it appears that we get the lowest burn, essentially. Once we find that, we then figure out the cause, and that's, what is our first thing that ignited on fire and what was the heat source put in place with it. And from there, we can figure out then the likelihood of it being accidental or intentional, basically is this a crime or not? So what we end up doing is classifying them out. Now, there are 4 official classifications. Natural, which means, an active nature, like spontaneous combustion of certain oils and like wet hay, lightning strikes, those kinds of things, or it happens. Accidental, but these are explainables. So somebody having a cigarette and throwing it out the window and it lands in a pile of leaves and starts a yard on fire, or somebody having a cooking accident. I can't tell you how many times we responded to cooking accidents where people were trying to make their own chicken wings at home and they put frozen chicken into the deep fryer, and that will then cause lots of grease to splash all over the place and ends up starting a kitchen fire. Then we have undetermined ones where the damage is so bad, there's so much going on where we just don't know. We will never know what started this fire. Years ago, we used to sometimes say suspicious. You're no longer able to say suspicious because the whole idea of with insurance companies and whatnot, if a fire is suspicious, they won't pay out on a claim, and you are innocent until proven guilty by a jury. So that becomes a little bit of a sticky point for us. We can't call them suspicious anymore. And then our last one is incendiary. Incendiary is basically a technical term for arson. And so if somebody intentionally set the fire, then we'll classify it as such. So I mentioned before multiple set points. When we're going through a structure and we're looking for areas that have little damage, to rule them out as a possible place where the fire started. Part of this reason is, also thinking about arson. Did a fire once at a 3-bedroom ranch house. We have garage on one side of the house. Come in from the garage, you're into the kitchen, you got the living room there, and then you've got a little hallway with 2 bedrooms on one side, master bedroom and bathrooms on the other side of the hallway. At the end of the hallway, there's a little tiny linen closet. We have a garage fire is what we were dispatched to. I begin my investigation. I go into the house. There had been a little bit of fire that had gotten in through the garage door into the kitchen. And so I begin my investigation in the house. And I get questioned, why are you going down the hall? The fire's in the garage. Stop wasting time. And I'm like, well, wait a second. I got to do this right. And so going down the hall, I go into this closet. And lo and behold, this is what I'm looking at. You got this pillow here. And, upon closer inspection, so this is my mid-range photo, and here's my close-up. And close-up is you've got this matchstick. You can kind of see it sitting here, but we've got a matchstick sitting there that these people, they tried to start 2 fires. They lit a match and set it on a pillow here in the closet, but they closed the closet door, and so the fire didn't have enough air, and it snuffed itself out. Then they went out to the garage and poured some oil on the ground under a car and lit a match there, thinking that, it would destroy the whole house, having 2 fires. Didn't quite work out for them. One of the things we're looking for, too, in the areas of little damage is what we call a trailer. So you can have folks, oftentimes they're, have a rightfully so a good fear of fire, a healthy fear of fire. And so they don't want to, have a bunch of gasoline on the couch and set a match to the couch and have this big fireball right there in their face. So what they'll do is they'll pour gasoline or kerosene or something else on the floor, making a little path and going back over here. And so then right over here by the door to go outside, they'll light their match and set the match down there on that little bit of gasoline. And then the fire follows the trail until it gets to the couch. Unfortunately for these people, they didn't pour any gasoline onto the couch. They just poured it close to the couch, and the fire wasn't hot enough to light the couch on fire and get the house going. Same with here. You got a little bit more of a pattern going from, an office out down into a hallway, and they're trying to move the fire around. Finding accelerants, we have a number of different electronic hydrocarbon detectors that we can bring into the scene, and we can wander around, and as we walk around, it will start beeping at us if it detects hydrocarbons. We also have dogs. There's only a couple of dogs here in Wisconsin, so you don't get dogs on a regular basis unless it's a pretty high value fire, or unless there's something going on where you are really suspecting arson early, and we bring the dogs on scene. Otherwise, we'll just use the hydrocarbon detectors, the electronic meters and whatnot, and see what we get. Fire evidence is placed into metal paint cans. Paper bags don't work so good because our evidence is wet. Plastic bags also don't work so good because of issues with molding, but then also remember, plastic is a petroleum byproduct, and so there raises the issue of, are you getting hydrocarbon samples from a debris and ash because it was gasoline poured into the crime scene, or do you have leaching of hydrocarbons out of the material into your ash, out of the bag into your ash? So we basically take and just fill a little bit of ash into our paint cans and seal it up, and the crime lab will then test the off-gassing to see if there's any vapors from gasoline, kerosene, whatever. Remember, we need multiple samples because we need to know, is that accelerant inherent to the material, or is that accelerant and added to the material? So you'll need to collect a sample where it's burned, and then also need to find an area that's unburned, because you look at some of our carpets and our underlayments. These are made out of plastics. These are made out of synthetic fibers. Some of them are petroleum byproducts, which means that they could be testing positive for hydrocarbons. Now the question though is, because it's a petroleum byproduct, is it going to test positive for, say, 15 parts per million, versus if you pour gasoline on the carpet, now you suddenly get a 10,000 parts per million. You get a higher test result to indicate that something of a petroleum product was added to this to facilitate burning. So we need to get our suspect sample from one side of the room where the burning is, and the other part of the room where there's no burn, we'll need to collect an additional sample. In a perfect world, we'd also like to get layers. We want to get samples, individual samples of the underfloor, of the carpet pad, of the carpet itself, of the wall trim, of the drywall, etc. It's not always possible, but in a perfect world, we would like to get each layer. Be mindful as you're collecting objects at a fire scene too of something called spoliation. When you have small appliances, people sometimes would like to start opening them up. Are you a certified GE Maytag repair person? No, you're not. So that means you can't be opening up the electrical access panels on a appliance to look at the wiring inside the appliance. That's what our forensic engineers are for. Likewise, don't start taking apart an electrical outlet. If you suspect an electrical fire, you take a section of the wall, a section of the wiring, and you take all that in as a whole object and allow an engineer to look at it later. Typical burn patterns. A lot of our arson photography investigation is photography. We're looking at burn patterns. So here we have a section of wall that's been burned, and as you look, the wall paneling is going up, and then it is burned through up here, and you can see this kind of like a V type shape where the fire burned itself up and out. Anything that doesn't look essentially V shaped then starts to become kind of suspect, and you can even see the fact that you have unburnt. This is, like we're in the bedroom of a house. On the other side of this wall would be, the living room. And so you're looking at the back of the drywall for the living room here that's unburnt. But up here, you can see the back of the drywall for the other room is got scarring. So, the fire is working its way up and out, and this is then left with very little damage. And you've got heat damage, and you do have damage to these wall boards, but the fire worked its way up and out and then is beginning to consume it down. Likewise, one of the things that we're looking for too is stuff like, say, saddle burns. A saddle burn is a great indicator of an arson. Go into the basement of the house, look up at the floor joist. Do you have burning on the floor joist when you have a first floor fire? If somebody's pouring gasoline on the floor, the gasoline is going to soak down through the carpeting, soak through the wood, go through cracks in the joists of the wood, or the seams of the wood, and will then sit there on the floor joist, and the heat will radiate down through, and you'll end up with burning down underneath. You don't see a lot of saddle burns, but it's just something to be looking for. It's just kind of one of those where you can go down one level from where the fire is and look up, and you can see whether or not the fire, which likes to burn up and out, is unnaturally coming down because you had some sort of accelerant or liquid poured onto that floor. All right, so just a couple little special challenges to think about as it relates to fire and arson. Police officers and firefighters, we work together well, but we have different missions and different mindsets. So, the fire department's mindset isn't really the same as ours in law enforcement, and so they aren't thinking about evidence sometimes. Fire itself sometimes destroys some of our evidence. It also creates more evidence, so that's kind of one of those misnomers. But the firefighters will oftentimes destroy our evidence, because again, their mindset is saving life and potential property. Maybe not the structure itself, but some of the valuables inside the structure that the family couldn't get out. And so they're cutting holes to allow heat to escape, to get smoke out of the house. And in doing so, they start damaging our burn patterns. And then lastly, we have an issue too of that suspect versus victim. We know that people will set their own structures on fire, businesses, homes, etc. So at what point do we cross that line and say, I'm not being, sympathetic to you because you're a victim, and now I start to be a little bit more aggressive in an interrogation type setting because you are no longer my victim, you are now my suspect, that this is not something bad that happened to you, this is something that you did to yourself for criminal reasons. So keep that in mind, that there comes that point where we have to make that jump from treating somebody as a suspect to a victim. And as some students like to point out too, isn't it possible that one member of a household has burned down the house and the other member of the household is not in on the scam, and so you have that issue too, where you do have somebody who is a victim, but yet they're still part of that suspect, and trying to figure out, do we have husband and wife or whatever the family dynamic is, they're both trying to do the scam, or do we have one doing something behind the other's back? All right, so that's what I have for today, or for this week, I should say. If you have any questions, as always, let me know. Otherwise, I will be talking with you next week.